Welcome everyone to another installment of NCSL's Census Updates. Always a thrill here at NCSL headquarters when we can have James Whitehorne and others join us to talk about the census. I realized today that we have been doing these informational meetings for just about a year, almost every month for just about a year. But this particular one is especially special, and that's because this one is post the release of the redistricting data. So internally, I'm giving a big round of applause to James Whitehorne and all the other folks at the Census Bureau. In fact, I'll just do it right there for you, James, for getting this project over the finish line in Yahoo. I have the feeling this means that you're not in the same kind of a pressure cooker that you were 2 weeks ago. Is that true? You're on mute, yeah.
That is true. I wouldn't say the pressure's all off. We still have some more work to do to get the final redistricting formats out the door. But definitely it's a different atmosphere.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's a little less intense than it was before. I know that the questions are still coming and I'm getting many of them too. Let's see, I do want to say that this meeting is being recorded and we will make it available after the fact. And we're going to hear from James first, as we so often do. And then we'll hear from Elizabeth Garner, and she is the state demographer for Colorado, and she's become kind of a regular on the NCSL census circuit this year, and we very much look forward to hearing a state-specific response to the kind of data that's come out. So James, I know you've got your slides ready to go, and I'm not going to talk long, but I do want you to know that we've been out in the States a little bit, and I say that in a virtual way. We've been out in the States a little bit, and the things I'm hearing are about the usability for redistricting purposes. I haven't heard a single thing about the usability for funding, but that's because that's not my job. So people are interested in prisoners and whether they're going to be able to reallocate the data related to those prisoners. And there's some uncertainty about group quarters, and there's uncertainty about differential privacy, which has led to some odd census blocks. I know you told us about all of that in advance, what was coming, but just know that those are the questions. And it's really interesting that I'm not hearing people make definitive statements or either good or bad. They're saying, I've still got questions. I'm still looking at the data. I'm still figuring out what the new release means. Also a teeny bit on the race categories. And I know you've shared that with us previously too. So I don't know whether those are the things you're planning on talking about, but maybe they'll come up in questions if you don't. So take it away.
All right. Thanks, Wendy. And I think I will hit on some of that. And if I don't, as you said, please have people feel free to ask questions when we get to that part of the presentation. So again, this is our census update. I feel like we haven't done one in a long time. It might be because we were doing them on an almost monthly basis before, but I'm very happy to be back here and to be able to share some post-release information and to talk through some of the things that we're hearing as well. I'm starting back with the content of the redistricting data set itself. And the reason why I'm doing that is because we've actually gotten a lot of questions around this. Ever since the release on August 12th, we've been fielding calls and providing support both in my area and across the Bureau for all the different areas that provide support to the public. And one of the areas where there's been some confusion is around the content of the redistricting data set. So, the redistricting data set is actually, although it's a very powerful data set because of its geographic specificity, it is really just a few simple tables. It's a table on race. And when we say race, we mean the major race categories. We're talking Black or African American, white, Asian, Hawaiian Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, or some other race. Then we also have a table on ethnicity, that's Hispanic or not Hispanic, and then the remainder of the population who's not Hispanic is iterated by race. We have age, but we only have voting age. So that's a question we're getting quite a bit. People are looking for age breakdowns, age by year, age by 5-year buckets. And the redistricting data set, because it's designed for redistricting an election-based activity, we provide the data for the population 18 and over. Now you can create the population for 17 and under through subtraction from these tables, but that's not the way it's provided in the tables that we've supplied. The other confusion is a lot of people, when they think of race, they're thinking of what census calls detailed race. Detailed race would be something like Portuguese or Egyptian or Thai or things like that. That would be sort of what we consider a detailed race category. Those are not included in the redistricting data. So those will come in later data products. We do have the occupancy status by housing table. And so that's there. That's the housing unit counts. And then the group quarters table as well. So the group quarters table, though, is only for total population. There have been some people who have had questions that they've submitted to us about the group quarters data that they've received, but they weren't aware that there was a group quarters table in the redistricting data set because it was new this decade. So by using that group quarters table, they can actually look to see which blocks have population that were assigned to group quarters and to which type of group quarters. So that's another tool that I think some people have missed, and I wanted to just point out by starting back here at the beginning. We did successfully put out the data in the legacy format file on our FTP site on August 12th. So we're very happy about that. That was a few days earlier than we had been originally projecting. So like you said, once it's ready, we got it out the door. So we were very happy to do that. And by all accounts, the release went very smoothly. We had a press conference. It started at 1 o'clock. We provided a lot of information and context around that. We also put up a supporting blog that describes the content of the data and the themes and the data that the Census Bureau was seeing as it was being released. It's sort of an accompaniment to what some of my co-presenters did during that press conference. And the actual distribution of the physical files went very well. We had an average of over 10,000 site visitors per hour in the first 3 hours after the data was released. We were getting 20 to 30 hits per second for the first hour. So it was obviously there was that huge burst of interest in the data, and we were able to support that without any hiccups. So we were very happy about that. And then at the same time, the Census Bureau, recognizing that these data are in that more complicated to use or additional work to use to get familiar tables format, the legacy format, we've made sure to provide a bunch of tools and visualizations at the same time as this press conference is going on. So what I want to do is highlight what some of those are so that people are aware that there are ways you can get to some of this data and look at some really powerful data visualizations while we're waiting for our data.census.gov platform. So before I get into that, though, just a reminder, the legacy format summary files are a text-based format style where we have 4 files for each state. One is the geo header that has all the geographic information. Then we have the tables that you saw in that earlier description where we said the contents of the redistricting data, P1 and P2 on data segment 1, P3, P4, and H1 on data segment 2, and P5, the group quarters table, is new and on data segment 3. This is all text files. It's all pipe delimited. That's all you, the only things you need to really worry about there. But you do need to use the geo header with those data segments to be able to pull data out to work with it if you're going to work with these files. We have a bunch of support materials out for those people who want to work with those legacy format files. We have the technical documentation. This has all the information about summary levels, about field headers and things like that that you might need to know, definitions, all in that technical documentation. It's all available. I'll show you later where to get that. We had created prototype data. People don't need to use the prototype data now. They can use the actual data if they want to work and practice with this, but there is prototype data as well. That's a smaller data set if they want to work with something that's not quite as large as a full state. There's a header file. This is an Excel table. One of the issues that we're encountering a lot when we provide support is when people extract tables from this data, they're not understanding what the field headers mean. Well, this is sort of a shortcut. It's an excerpt of some of the material that's in that technical documentation, where it's just an Excel table that has all of the headers listed out, but then there's an accompanying tab for each one of the headers of the files that has the plain English. So it'll tell you that P0010001 means total population from the P1 table. So it has that level of information to help people translate and understand and put this in sort of plain English. We have a Microsoft Access database shell that makes working with the data very simple. We have an illustrated guide on how to work with it and a video tutorial that walks people through that. I think the two together really gives people a strong understanding of the data, and based on our experience last decade versus this decade and the number of requests for assistance, I think these things have really helped people out a lot because we're getting a lot fewer calls of people asking how to use it. And then we have, for those statistically minded folks, we have import scripts that help people work with this in SAS and R, different software languages. But what I wanted to focus on really is the additional tools that are out there. So if people need data from the Census Bureau during this interim time between these legacy files and our release in September, we have ways that people can access the redistricting data, or at least parts of the redistricting data. The first is our Quick Facts application. The Quick Facts application publishes data for total population. The data included is for 8 different geographies. We have the nation, we have the states, we have Puerto Rico, we have counties and municipios. And then for the places and zona urbanas and MCDs being like townships in New England and the upper Midwest, for those, just the places, the zona urbanas and the MCDs, those are only published for populations of 5,000 or more. So if you have a smaller city or a smaller township or a smaller zona urbana, it won't show up in Quick Facts. But for most of them, those that are 5,000 or more, you will be able to get it by coming in here. And you can actually put up to 6 different geographic entities, so you can have them side by side and compare if that's something that is of interest to you. At the same time as the redistricting data was released on the 12th, we also published from our geography division a really powerful map to help people both see the spatial distribution of this data and to be able to find some of this data. So this map shows state level data, county level data, and then census tract level data. And it automatically changes between them as you zoom in and out of the map so that you're looking at the appropriate geography for the appropriate scale. The information in here is a little bit of everything from the redistricting data set. You have population counts, you have race alone in combination, you have ethnicity, housing, the group quarters. But we also added in both population density, so you can see that information. And we also did population change, so between 2010 and 2020 for these geographies. Also, one of the other benefits of this tool is if you're zoomed in, you're looking at something of interest, you can actually hover your mouse over the specific geography that you want numbers for, and a little pop-up box will come up and show you the numbers for that underlying geography from the map. So this one's a really useful tool as well. And then something that was, I thought was very impressive was these Tableau visualizations that our demographics directorate put together with our communications directorate. These are really, really easy to use ways to look at the data and try to look at it in context. So they produced several of these. They create one for the population 18 over and under. They have one on race and ethnicity in the United States with comparisons between 2010 and 2020. And then they have one on race and ethnicity, ethnic diversity in the United States with comparisons between 2010 and 2020. And so you can see here, like there's tabs at the top where you can shift what's shown. There's on the right-hand side, you can pick an individual state. And what this will do is it'll flip from a national view showing the states and a rankings on the left. If you look at an individual state, it'll switch to where it's ranking the counties within that state. So you can start to see the detail and the geographic distribution of the information that you're looking at. So this is an example of what it looks like when you zoom into a state and it shows the ranking of the counties and provides that information for you. And then you can go to the final tab, which says, what are my facts for my state or county? And you can see what that does is it pulls up a list where you have the United States, you've got the state that you're looking at, and then you have the county that you're looking at. And those toggles are up above. So you can switch which state and you can switch which county you're looking at. It provides ranking lists. It provides information about the aged 18 and over. It provides information about the under age 18. So you can really pull a lot of information from these data visualizations, as well as looking at the visual distribution of that data. So in addition to this one on the 18 and over and 18 and or under 18 population, we also had 2 others that I mentioned. We have the race and ethnic diversity in the United States. And so we've got that one there, the diversity index. You can see that has 4 different tabs in which you can go into and work with and look at the data. And you can also, in this version, look at the data tables that underlie that. You have the same functionality of also picking a state. So you can narrow down and look at your state and county. Then on the other one, we have the race and ethnicity in the United States. This has information about the percentages for each group. You can go in and pick each group's individually. You can pick white alone, you can pick white in combination, or you can pick white alone or in combination. So you can pick multiple things. You can do, do that sort of versioning of different types of ways to look at the data in all the different categories that are contained in the redistricting data set. So that really is a powerful thing there. And this one also has that table version where you can say what are the facts for my state or county, and you can also jump to the state and see the county level. All the while, these as you change your settings on these interactive maps, the ranking lists will update as well, so that you can continue to see how those things all fit together. Something that's new, this was just put out this week because we're continuing to try to provide information. These came out on the 25th. We put out profiles, state profiles, and it includes all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And these are, they leverage those Tableau visualizations that I showed you before, but they isolate them to tell stories about each state, each specific state, and highlight key demographic characteristics and trends for those states. So I just put the image of the 6 first ones in the list here, but as you can see, because it's very visually pretty. But I also wanted to just make sure that people are aware that this is out there. The links in the slide here, and I'll make sure that these slides are shared with NCSL so they can share them with attendees after this is over. So as we move beyond the August 12th data release, we have one more release coming up. So we should be able to narrow down, hopefully sometime next week, to a more exact date of when these data will be released in September. Currently, we're still saying by September 30th, but we will be doing 2 things. One, we're going to be mailing the official recipient list, which is the governors, the majority minority legislative leaders, any redistricting commissions that we've been able to identify contacts for, and then our nonpartisan liaisons to the redistricting program. We're going to mail them these DVDs and flash drives with the integrated browsing software so that they can use that to more easily access the data. We're also going to populate our data.census.gov platform. This is our main tool for getting that data out the door. So those DVDs, what do they look like? So they have this integrated browsing software. As you can see, it just creates a GUI interface, a graphical user interface that data users can use to pick what kind of geography they want to see, pick the specific geography that they want to see, pull up comparison tables. There's also some, under the file menu, there's some custom extraction tools that we've created where you can pull out things like all blocks in state, or all voting districts in state, or all voting districts in county, and sort of dump those out into tables and Excel tables that you can then easily load into other software if you're trying to load a database or something with specific geographic levels. So we built some of that in here too. So this is sort of what the official recipients of the data required by law will receive. And then our data.census.gov tool. When I talk about this, I tend to try to, the equivalent to me is something like a shopping site. And I've said this before in some of my presentations, like this to me is like going to Amazon or Walmart and going in and saying, I want a blue sweater and I want it for a man and I want it for a medium size, and picking all those things. And then the only thing that is being displayed to me is those things that meet my filter characteristics. In the same way, you can go in and say, I want the redistricting data set as the survey, and I want it for 2020, and I want it for just race data, and then only those tables that are responsive to the filters that you've set will show up in your choices, and then you can pull those up. So it's a very flexible tool, it's a powerful tool, and it allows you to consistently explore the data in ways that are intuitive and provide you with views of the data that are intuitive to understand. So I think this is a very important tool. This is our primary dissemination tool, and that is one of the things that's coming in September. Something I wanted to be very clear about and point this out, partly because we talked about this in Salt Lake at the redistricting seminar, and I've gotten further clarity on, or for further clarifications on the whether the August or September delivery, which is the Census Bureau's official redistricting data. So from the census, normally in a standard census where we didn't have COVID delays and we were releasing this data, we would provide all of these data formats at the same time because they're all the same data. So from the census's point of view, the data from August and the data in September, since they're identical, and states can use either one of them as they feel is appropriate based on their statutes and their constitutional requirements. The Census Bureau considers both August and September to be official and fit for use for redistricting. So I wanted to point this out. This is actually posted on the Census website if anyone needs to point to something in writing. And that link is also in here, so you'll get that when we provide the slides after the session's over. I do want to talk a little bit about disclosure avoidance. Wendy was kind of, some of the issues that Wendy was bringing up, I think, intersect here. I think it's important people understand a few things about our top-down algorithm, which is the accumulation of mathematical formulas that were used to provide the privacy protections for the redistricting data. There were some things that were not changed in that, but there aren't many. The total population at the state level, that was held invariant meaning it's unchanged from the enumerated value. The number and type of occupied group quarters facilities at the block level. So this is not the population within those facilities. This is the type and the number of them. So if you had 2 jails within a single block, that would be 2 group quarters jail type in that block, and that would not change. So you wouldn't have a jail become a nursing facility or something like that, or 2 jails become 1. Those would not change. The number of housing units, whether they're occupied or not, so just the count of housing units, that is unchanged at the block level. But their status as occupied or vacant could change. So it's just the total number of housing units that was left unchanged in here. As our acting director, Dr. Ron Jarman, mentioned in a blog before we released the data, people have to understand that this data is a little different than what we've done in the past, in a sense that the blocks may look funny or fuzzy. The data may not look exactly like what you expect, and that's because we have injected some noise to protect people at that finest level of geography. But it's the way the system is designed is as you put those blocks together, they rapidly increase in accuracy. The resulting district or the resulting school district or the resulting voting district or the resulting legislative district, as you start to put those blocks together, they rapidly increase in accuracy until, I think the measurement that our scientists were able to determine is when you get to somewhere around the 200 to 249, I believe, population for a place or a township, you're getting to a very high level of accuracy for not just the total population, but for the characteristics as well. So a couple other things to point out. The counts are consistent within the tables and across geographies. What this means is that the total population in the P1 table is the total population in the P2 table, because we're both measuring from total population. It also means that all the tracts within a county will add up to the county's population. So you have that consistency in the pipe going through the geography, you have consistency between tables, you have consistency in the sense that the voting age population will always be less than the total population. So you have these consistencies all built into the data. So it's very much as you have expected it to be before. Data should not be divided across tables. There's a lot of concern around the fact that we've broken the link between the people and the housing. So what that has done is created it creates a situation where if you divide between houses, it's not going to give you or between the tables, it's not really an appropriate tool anymore with this specific data set. Other data sets down the line will provide different data that will replace what you would have done by trying to do those divides. You can do subtraction. So like I mentioned, the under 18 that's in that one data visualization, the 17 and under, that is created by subtracting from the total the 18 and over, and that is okay, and you can do so without any kind of substantial decrease in accuracy there. To help people understand the impact of our top-down algorithm that was used for the 2020 census data, we created one final redistricting data set, demonstration data set for the last, let's see, from October of 2019 all through this past summer. We were continuing periodically to produce these demonstration data sets to show how we had done with our development on this protection technique of the top-down algorithm that we used. So what we did is we created one final redistricting demonstration data set using 2010 census data, using the 2020 production settings on that 2010 data, and created a final privacy protected microdata file. We have a lot of summary metrics. I didn't put them all here, but the link that's on this slide will take you to the pages that have these summary metrics. There's just spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of different metrics at different geographic levels for different characteristics, total population and the different characteristics. But we have a lot of those to show the accuracy levels that were achieved by those production settings. Also, some colleagues at the Minnesota's IPUMS Institute, the National Historic Geographic Information System, part of that organization, have processed those PPMFs, which are kind of difficult to work with just due to the volume. They've processed them into not only specific geographic levels, but they've also included the equivalent reported 2010 census data so that you have the PPMF results and the 2010 results right there next to each other, and to help you if you put it through your use case, and you can see the impact of these production settings on what you would have done in 2010. So I think that's a very useful tool out there as well if you have any concerns about the application of this new technique. So I've streamlined the slide a little bit and added more. We've moved all of our legacy format summary file support materials under this decennial census PL 94-171 redistricting data summary file link that's on the main redistricting data program webpage, which is just www.census.gov/RDO. So that's your easiest way to get to it. You can go there. We've got links to the actual FTP site. We've got links to all the support materials for the legacy format files there, lots of other materials. But what I think is really neat that we did add on the day of release is we've added this accordion menu on the page at the bottom. I've only included the first of many. I think there's like 8 or 9 of these little accordions that are there. And they have all sorts of information. They've got all the visualizations I showed you before, the data tools like quick facts, all the blogs that we've been posting, news releases, our data gems videos, which sort of break some of these more complex ideas up into smaller little video clips that people can watch. All of that is in these accordion menus. So you just click the arrow, it opens up each section, you can see what's there, or you can click the arrow, close it up and go to the next section and see what's there, and you can find all those materials. So that's, I think, a great help for people looking for some of the stuff I've talked about. Now, I do want to touch on the quality metrics. We've released some additional quality metrics. You know, we've started releasing quality metrics in December of 2020. We've released some around the time we released the apportionment counts, and we've released some now around the redistricting data that came out on 8/12. So on 8/18, they produced something called national and state level summaries of county and tract distributions. And the distributions are of all of these different categories you see under here, the percent of all addresses that were unresolved, meaning it went to our count imputation. The percent of all addresses resolved by online self-response. Like, so all of these different categories. But what they did is they looked at it at county by county and tract by tract, and then they summarized those to the state and national level. So you're not going to see county and tract information at of these pieces of information, but what you see is the aggregation of those, the looking at those county and tract distributions summarized to the state and national level. So that's one pretty important thing, and I've got a link that goes directly to that there. They did this, they did a mean, they did a standard deviation and median for each of these, for each state as well. And then just this week, they released quality metrics for item non-response. Now, I know item non-response was in the news a little bit before the data came out. There were some preliminary numbers that had gotten out into the public realm. Those numbers have been revised as they were only interim. You know, we had not yet completed our deduplication. There were a lot of other things that had to go on before we could get the true item non-response rates. So they've created the item non-response rates here, and they've produced them at the nation and the state level. They've broken them out by the major questions, your population count, how many people live here, people's age or date of birth, their race question, the Hispanic origin question. And then not only that, they've subdivided that by self-response, non-response follow-up, other housing unit operations like update or enumerate, where we actually go and we enumerate at the household for the very first attempt at enumeration. We don't do a paper mailing for those. And then our group quarters enumerations. They've broken out those categories by these other categories in addition. The finding overall was that the missing data rates were low overall. So looking at the range based on the questions that are being reported here, for the 2020 census, the population count missing rate was at 0.52%. And the highest category in the 2020 census for non-response was the age or date of birth, which is at 5.95%. In the 2010 census, it was 1.43% for population count. And the highest category for non-response in 2010 census was 3.99% for Hispanic origin. So you can get a sense of scale there. And there's, again, a ton of information about this that I could not do justice. I bring someone in to do a presentation on data quality if that's something you all would like to hear again in the future. But there is a lot of information about this that's on the web. I put the link there as well. So you'll get that in the slide deck as well. And then I wanted to talk about count question resolution. So this is a program that is tied to the decennial census, which is it provides a mechanism for government units to request a review of their 2020 numbers to help ensure that they're correctly allocated to the right blocks in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. There are limited circumstances under which an appeal can be made. So the current plan is for letters to go out in December to notify the tribes and state local governments about the eligibility to file these cases. In January of this coming year, we will start accepting those cases, and those cases will be accepted and processed all the way through. We'll be able to receive them all the way through September 30th, 2023. So there's quite a big window that people want to submit those. The dates are subject to change. I know they're looking really hard at this program. They've got that new Federal Register notice supposed to come out in the fall. So I would say if you're interested in this program, I would continue to pay attention and look for that Federal Register notice here in the next 2-3 months as we move into fall. And here's just an example of the cases that are currently in scope for CQR. There's both living quarter count cases and boundary case correction examples. Boundary case corrections is a pretty easy one to explain. This would be if you're a jurisdiction and you think that the boundary census had is not correct for what your boundary was. This is the important part, for what your boundary was on January 1st of 2020, because that's what the census is based off of for the boundary vintage. You can submit that as one of your CQR cases, and if it's accepted, they'll adjust the boundary and adjust the and provide you with what's called an errata that gives you a new population count that can be used for future purposes. It doesn't change the redistricting data. It doesn't change the apportionment data. It doesn't change the demographic housing and characteristic file. But what it does do is it feeds into the population estimates, which are used every year and are a critical piece of data produced by the Census Bureau for funding applications and things like that. The living quarters count cases, it can be something in the sense of a geocoding correction, meaning that you felt that certain units were located in the wrong place and moving them into the correct place, if that is an accepted one. Another is a coverage correction, meaning that you felt that some of the addresses that were in the census were inappropriately left out of the census. If that's the case, and they can find that they were part of the census, but they were just not included when it came time to do the population counts, they can sometimes get added back in. I don't know the very specifics of that, but that's sort of the general idea there behind that. And I think I'll stop there. I probably went longer than I intended. So I'd say thank you, and I'm going to turn off the slide deck so I can see you all again.
Thank you, James. There was a lot of information there and very useful. Do I remember correctly that prior to the release of the data, you had told us several times that you were going to release the data in legacy format, but not give any help on it? And yet here you are giving us all these kinds of help. Did I not remember that correctly? Weren't you saying this is on you guys?
So I think we may have said something along those lines, but we also recognize that, you know, this is a public good and we had to do what we can. So we continue to try to look to see what we can do to support people while we go through this extended release of the full set of redistricting data. So I just hope they're well received and that people are able to use them for pulling the information that they need while they wait for the data.census.gov platform to be live.
Got it. I'm thinking that's a promise low and deliver high experience that we've just had with that kind of stuff. And the data visualizations were pretty fun. I was thinking that some of us have gotten a little more attuned to those kinds of things because of all the COVID data that we've been consuming. But then when you came up with the state profiles, that's brand new. And each one of them is a beautiful thing unto itself. I hope everyone will look into those. I'm going to just ask one question before we move on to Elizabeth Garner, and then we've got some questions saved that we'll come back around to. But my question is, we didn't discuss the post-enumeration survey. Could you just give us when that'll come out and ever so briefly, what will be involved in the what data will be released with the post-election enumeration survey?
So I'm not very well versed in the post-enumeration survey. My limited understanding of the timing is that it should be sometime starting in 2022. They'll be able to start bringing some information out from the results. And that would be the type of information, things like the undercounts and overcounts that people are very interested in as quality measures are typically drawn from that survey.
So 2022, there's nothing coming this year. Got it. Okay, James, sit tight, relax just a little bit. Elizabeth, it's always a pleasure to work with you, and I love the way your slides are always very clean and clear. So show us some slides and tell us what one state's experience has been, what Colorado's experience has been with looking at the new data.
Super. Well, thanks for inviting me to be with the program again today. I appreciate it. So just real quickly, what we've been able to do is take a look at both really the real data and identify where we think there might be problems with differential privacy, as well as with maybe just problems with the census. And then as well as we've done some evaluation of that PPMF file, the demonstration data that James was talking about. So, you know, and I think I just basically mentioned this, that talk about the DB concerns as well as the process, potentially the census itself, and then looking at the PPMF. So, you know, we did what we weren't supposed to do, right? I mean, we were looking at block level data, which they've said all along, don't look at because it's not going to be good. Well, we're going to do it anyway because we need block level data and people are still using block level data. And across the board, people are sharing those situations with this kind of that impossible, improbable outcomes where there isn't consistency between occupied housing units, total housing units, and population. So in Colorado, interestingly, we had about 14, almost 1,900 blocks with occupied housing units, but no population. And what's weird is that this is actually even higher than what we saw in other demonstration data. So as promised, the block level data got worse. So they delivered. We also saw 1,900 blocks with a population with a household size greater than 10, which is actually 3 times as many blocks as we saw with the April PPMF. And then also about 1,400 blocks, almost 1,500 blocks with children only. And oddly, it also was happening in our smallest counties, which I will also mention is another issue that we've had. At the tract level, which again, we were supposed to be able to somewhat trust the tract level. We have heard from a lot of states where they've got large shares of their tracts with these impossible and improbable outcomes. But in Colorado, not a ton. We had one tract that has, you know, 0 household population, yet more than 1 or more than 0 occupied housing units, 2 tracts with household population, but no occupied housing units, and then several tracts with very high persons per household. And again, this may not matter to a lot of you that are looking at the redistricting, but for us that we end up having to do population estimates, and James mentioned them, that we have those during the intercensal timeframe. They're used for everything. So they are really important for us to be able to look at. So as I mentioned, blocks are still used. You guys still use blocks, and even on the margins, you guys still use blocks. And so whether you're trying to get the total count to be equal, you are taking in blocks. And so I still think that their expectations are somewhat ridiculous. And as I mentioned, we use them all the time to create small area estimates. We've got these fire protection, hospital, park and rec districts that rely on block level counts, persons per household, and occupancy rates. And it does, and this is directly for funding, not just understanding your population base and who you're serving, but also how you're getting dollars. When we then take it down a level and maybe look at, or up a level and take a look at both county and municipalities on those, on the 2020 counts themselves, what we're finding is sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's a DP issue or whether it's just a tough census count issue. We had a couple of counties where we saw growth, county level, where we saw growth in the under 18, yet absolute decline in the over 18, and for decades where the under 18 had been declining. These are also the same counties that we saw those blocks with children only. So we think this is a DP issue. We're working with the counties and looking at, we're getting the birth data to see and school enrollment, stuff like that, to do some verifications. Because again, these are at county level, it's not these small levels. Housing units, we're seeing definitely some interesting changes in housing units. And again, those are supposed to be invariant. So we think that this is more a census issue rather than a DP, but several municipalities and counties with absolute declines in housing units over the decade. And in Colorado, there's about 40 of our municipalities we've got that had an absolute decline, which could be good, because we did see in 2010, there are a lot of inhabitable or uninhabited or non-habitable housing units being counted as housing units. And if you're doing any housing research and trying to do any building plans or affordable housing, any of that, you really do need a good count of total housing units. So this could be a good case, or it could be bad. Most of the areas where we're seeing this large decline in total number of housing units are in areas that were part of the hand delivery of the census, and that's where they also did updates of housing units. This was called their update leave process. This was just bad, and I hope there's changes before 2030, because there's challenges with census with COVID. There were challenges because when they were finally delivered, it was during a storm, and we got calls from people saying, yeah, no, there's census forms flying everywhere. And this was also where we were having fires. So we do think that there could be some issues with just a solid count. And then there's weird overcounts. Like we had one municipality, it's a municipality of over 50,000 that contacted us and said, yeah, no, the housing count is way overcounted, which again would be a census issue, not necessarily a DP. We really do, again, rely on accurate data to try and create these estimates. And so even these improbable and impossible at the municipality level are going to be creating problems, especially in terms of household size. We have to split municipalities by their share in certain counties, and that happens, I'm sure, across the country, not just in Colorado. But basically, we've had to now make up data for over 50 municipalities that cross county boundaries because those parts have unreasonable persons per household and unreasonable occupancy rates or occupancy status. In terms of looking also at the census evaluation, we definitely seen issues with GQs, several GQs in the wrong block. Now, most of the time they are adjacent blocks, which is good because then they're not at least too far away, but we did so much work. And so this is so disappointing to see. And sometimes when it is in that adjacent block, we're seeing that it's like moved from the incorporated to the unincorporated, or vice versa, which does create problems in terms of count. We're also seeing a lot of inconsistency with universities, where some universities look spot on and then others show like empty. We're like, okay. So there is those inconsistencies, and then just weird stuff where we saw GQs be created in areas that absolutely don't have a GQ. And in a couple of our cases, of course, they're very small counties, and now those counties show up as one of our top 11 growing counties in terms of growth rates in the state, just because there was a GQ added that doesn't exist. One question I guess I do have for James is that he had mentioned that the count of those GQ facilities by block is to be invariant, but it wasn't released. And so we're wondering, how do we get those numbers? In terms of looking at DP and evaluating DP on that latest PPMF file that was released, that is for the 2010 data, but it's using the production settings for the PL file. Positive, it looks like counties are good. So counties are okay. If we're looking at GQs, GQs any smaller than about 300 probably can't be used at the county level. But anything greater than 300 is okay. But at less than 300, there's a large difference. I think there are some problems with the under 18 population for counties less than 1,000. And that's a problem. And that could be our issue where I was saying before that we had problems with our under 18 population. And we've got 16 of our counties that do have population under 1,000 with that population under 18. But again, that's why we're thinking that we've got these issues in a couple of our counties. Persons per household, definitely don't use in areas under 20,000 is kind of what we've seen, as well as occupancy rates in areas with less than 1,000 housing units. And at the place level, just really tough for places less than 500 housing units. Those kind of the findings that we've seen so far. We're excited to play with more. I will definitely repeat what Wendy had said about the census over promising in terms of that release in August. The website and all of those fun tools, that was truly amazing and really helped places like us that we knew that we were going to get a ton of questions. And I think by having those websites set up and being able to look and visualize was incredibly helpful. So completely appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. James, come on, and Elizabeth, let's all stay on for a moment. Elizabeth, you had a question for James and it went by too quickly for me, but I know it related to group quarters. Do you want to just go ahead and ask him at this point?
So it is that invariant total group quarter facility count at the block level. You know, wasn't released in the PL file. Wondering when or how to get that set.
And that was why I was off camera. Is I was furiously trying to. I'm on my personal computer because we're using Zoom, and I was trying to transfer a link over, and so I'm gonna have to do it afterwards. But I'm gonna drop I'll provide the link to Wendy and Christy, and they can provide it back out to this audience. There's a tool that just came out on the 24th, and it's from our geography division, and it's called the Address Count Listing File Viewer, and it's a map viewer that you can go in and look at individual blocks, and you can get the housing unit count and the GQ count by block from that tool. So I'll make sure that we provide that link. But it was not something that was ready on release day. It just came out earlier this week on Tuesday.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I've got a question for you, but before I ask it, I want to say to everyone that I think you've got the drill down. You can send to christy.zamarripa@ncsl.org if you have a question that you don't want to have your name on. And otherwise, you can put them in the chat. And if you want to ask something yourself, if you could put that in the chat too, so I don't have to watch for the little hand signals there. So Elizabeth, someone had asked if perhaps they'd missed something. could the true number of housing units with household population size be greater than 10 have increased from 2010? I think this means, could it be that there are in fact more families with more than 10 people in a household?
I highly doubt it.
Okay.
I mean,
Right.
that just doesn't happen. So yeah.
All right. So James, an early question that came in for you is, what could you say about the other race category that doesn't fit with the others? What is included in the other race category that doesn't fit in the other groups? So just give us a quick rundown again on race versus ethnicity and the subsets within that.
Yeah, so the sum of the race category is considered one of the race categories. The Census Bureau is required to use that category as part of the choices that are offered. And the census is a self-response survey. So it's how people self-identify. So when people look at the other 5 categories of race that are possible, you know, the Black or African American, white, Asian, Pacific, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or American Indian, Alaska Native, if they don't see themselves there, they tend to put themselves in the some other race category. The some other race, when you look at it and you sort of look at it more deeply, it most often tends to be people who identify as Hispanic. The plurality of folks in that category identify as Hispanic. And Hispanic is not considered a race, it's an ethnicity. So when they have to answer a race question and then the ethnicity question, well, actually the ethnicity question and then the race question, oftentimes people who identify as Hispanic don't see themselves in those other categories and they put themselves into some other race. Or as you saw, that's an area where we sometimes get a little bit of non-response. And so if someone declares themselves as Hispanic or provides a category that would be Hispanic, and they don't provide a race, and that ends up getting imputed or edited, oftentimes that ends up in the some other race category. So
okay, thank you. That's continues to be a little confusing for many of us. And we did have a question ourselves earlier this week about the race categories and how this relates to OMB. Do you want to throw in anything extra about how things might be different than last decade or based on OMB decisions?
Well, I mean, so this decade, we're still operating under the 1997 Directive 15, which is sort of the guidance from OMB to federal statistical agencies on how to both collect and report information on race and ethnicity. And so until OMB makes a change to that guidance, we as a federal agency are required to follow that. So that we're currently operating under that same requirement as we did in 2010.
Okay, great. Now I have a question that came in for you, James, but I think both of you are going to want to ask this. This is from Peter Watson. Would you, James, would you please say again the level at which block level data becomes relatively accurate? I heard both that it would be accurate at the voting tabulation district level, 2,000 people or so, and that would be accurate for groups of 250 or more, which would be some of the larger blocks. So James, if you could address that, and then Elizabeth will have you take a stab at that as well.
Sure. So the senior researcher and one of his colleagues did an analysis of the disclosure avoidance mechanism that we used to try to identify where we reach a specified level of accuracy. And that level of accuracy was defined as being 95% confidence that we're within 5% of the actual value. And so this also applies to the 95% for the largest racial group within that area. So racial or ethnic group in that area. So the accuracy targets they reached were between 400 or 450. I'm sorry, looking over at my notes here. 450 and 499 for people in block groups provide reliable characteristics of the demographics in block groups, and 200 and 249 of total population is observed in a place or township. It provides reliable characteristics for that place or township. So once you're getting up to something like 2,000 people, that you're getting up to essentially fully accurate data for those characteristics and total population. We're very close to it.
And Elizabeth,
I think what you're saying is that in larger blocks, the racial and ethnic data will be accurate? Because there are plenty of blocks with more than 250 people. If you're
So
working only with blocks that are big, your data will be accurate, but if you're using much smaller blocks, it will not be accurate?
I don't want to make that statement because I've always heard of this as an accumulation of blocks to reach that population threshold. So I would have to double check with our disclosure scientists to see if a single block that already meets that population threshold also meets that accuracy target. So I just don't want to make that definitive statement without checking with them first.
Thank you. Then would you be so kind as to provide that in writing? Whatever the answer is. Thank you.
Elizabeth, could you respond to this general question about what level we begin to see the accuracy? I can read it again if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for the total population, we're feeling pretty good at, and again, this is our own work. This is not coming directly from the Census Bureau. So our own work, we have seen that really anything kind of greater than 300 to 500 for total population has been pretty good. We're not having that same feeling about characteristics. We definitely have had some issues looking at, like I said, children, looking at GQ pop, where we're not seeing that same level of confidence at that size. So, you know, what we're stating to user groups is, if it looks funny, ask, you know, that it really could just be bad. So that's kind of our, unfortunately, our words of wisdom to people that are using smaller levels of geography.
All right. And James, I wonder if you know if many people are doing as Elizabeth has done and accessing the demonstration data set that was provided in August, or is Elizabeth one of the few who's doing that? Do you have a sense of that? Is maybe Elizabeth's peers all across the nation are looking at that?
So I can't really say what folks are doing. What I can say is that since that latest demonstration data came out at the exact same time as the redistricting data, my assumption is, or my inclination is, that the people who actually are doing redistricting have not been able to look at that and are probably had to jump right in and get started with redistricting because they were getting such a late start. But then there are hopefully people like Elizabeth and others who can look at that data and take the time to actually look at that data and provide information back to us and to the rest of the redistricting community and other data users.
And you make a good point that for those who are actually doing redistricting, that was the gun going off for the race, the redistricting race, and they might be done with what are the possibilities and the probabilities and the things behind the scenes. Elizabeth, do you think it's likely that your peers all across the nation are doing this? So people in whatever state they might be doing redistricting could turn to their demographer and get the kind of analysis that you've been able to provide for Colorado?
So I do know that a lot of my colleagues are doing this analysis of the PPMF. Yes, it was cruel to release both on the same day. That was just mean, because we had obvious interest in both, but we're not doing the redistricting. And so I think you're right. Groups that are just doing the redistricting probably are not studying the PPMF and are either having other people doing it or leave it to other people. But what's nice is that what you kind of find for one state is fairly consistent across states. Not 100%. We definitely saw an issue with what I would say like concentration. So like in the West, we've got much more of a case to where we've got large places and really small places, compared to the East, where you've got more areas that are very similar sized. And so that would be kind of the big differential that we've seen across the country, is the West looks more like the West and the East more looks like the East when studying the PPMF.
Got it. Thank you. It looks as though we have come to the end of the questions from this audience. I believe that both you, James, and you, Elizabeth, are happy to take questions if they come up after the fact. And if anyone needs us to field those, to get them back to James and Elizabeth, that they've provided their emails, we can certainly do that. I guess I just want to close by saying that I appreciate the work that James and his team has done under great duress. And I look forward to more answers to questions as we go forward from the redistrictors, as they see what data is useful and where they're might find some tripping points. And I look forward to more information from the demographers of the world, who are kind of representing, I guess I'd say, the people who care about funding, which is distributed to the states based on formulas with census data. And that's not going to be a rush for the next 3 or 4 months. That's going to be something you're going to be looking at for some time to come. So with that, my thanks to both of you and to all of you for coming on board today to hear what's the latest. And James will have you back perhaps right after the September releases as well. So thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.